I'm delighted to welcome our panel. Our panel have been very much involved in developing the content for the themes that we've all attended over the past 2 days. But first of all, I'm actually going to go first to theme 2, to Alistair Kent, who discussed game changers in diagnosis. Many of you will know Alistair. For those of you who don't, Alistair Kent is an OBE and he's the director of the Genetic Alliance UK, the national charity of over 180 patient organisations supporting all of those affected by genetic conditions. So your thoughts, Alistair?
Yes, thank you very much, Avril. I was sitting through the theme 2, the importance of diagnosis, and a number of, I think, key messages came out of the excellent presentations that we listened to. Diagnosis is a potentially life-changing event for families. When you know you have a child or a family member where there's something that you can see is seriously wrong, but you don't know what it is, you don't know what the implications are, then you search for a diagnosis. And that diagnosis can bring with it opportunities, it can bring with it insights that you wouldn't have, it can enable you to understand what's happened to you, it can enable you to plan for the future in a way that you can't do when you don't have a diagnosis. It can also bring devastating news. It can confirm that you or your child or your loved one does have a life-limiting disease, that they are going to progress and that their life may be short and impaired by all sorts of currently unavoidable developments. So from the diagnostic theme, the key messages are, first of all, that we need to improve the speed and accuracy with which we are able to make a diagnosis. Too many patients spend too long, too many families spend too long waiting for that news, not knowing what to expect, not knowing how they can cope with it. We also need to improve the ability by which we transfer scientific understanding into clinical practice. We need to make sure that our clinical laboratories are equipped with the necessary technology, with the personnel, with the skills, the knowledge, the experience to be able to give accurate, reliable information for clinicians and for patients and families to act on. In a research laboratory, you're allowed to make mistakes because you're dealing with uncertainty. You're creating knowledge, not necessarily transmitting it immediately. In a clinical laboratory, the consequences of a mistake can be devastating. So we need to make sure that when we do generate new knowledge, it is translated into clinical practice in ways that are robust and that we can all rely on. And we also need to be able to address the inequity that exists across Europe and around the world. Unfortunately, what you can access by way of services and support in order to get you to the point of diagnosis often depends as much on where you live as what condition you have and you're affected by. Too many people in too many countries struggle to get to the point where a clinician can work with them and say, we know what this is and we know what we can do about it. So we need to address the scientific research that will produce the robust diagnostic techniques. We need to address the infrastructure concerns that will ensure that those robust diagnostic techniques are able to be delivered in a competent clinical setting. And we need to address the inequalities that mean that for too many people in too many parts of Europe and the rest of the world, their access to information, their access to understanding is constrained not by what we know or what we don't know, not by our current scientific opportunities to discover, but simply by the inequalities that families face based on geography, wealth, and other non-relevant non-clinical factors. So those are the take-home messages from our strand, and I hope that we can work together to progress them and address them in ways that will ensure that families are likely to be able to access timely, accurate, reliable diagnoses universally.
Thank you, Alistair. We're going to move now to theme 1, and Hugh Dawkins was responsible for that theme. So, Hugh, what do you think were the game changers? What came out of your session? And just to say that Hugh, for those of you who don't know him, is a PhD, is the Director of the Office of Population Health and Genomics at the Health Department of Western Australia. So you're very welcome.
So thank you, Avril. Our theme was, theme 1 was the game changers in research, and it won't surprise you to hear that the game changers in research are not very different from the game changers that Alistair described. And I present them from the perspective of, if you're a researcher and you're involved in research, then the game changers is achieving is not about the diagnostics, it's about a diagnosis. And if you have that as a firm vision, then you will be working with the clinical community and the patient community to achieve an accurate and an early diagnosis. This is still, out of all of the themes and out of all of the discussions across these 2 days, this is still the most defining moment, is that an accurate diagnosis. It's the portal to the patient's best care. And so from a research perspective, what can you focus on to help to achieve that? You can focus on analytics, and you can focus on bioinformatics, and you can focus on a whole lot of other tools. But really the objective of that is a safe, an accurate and an early diagnosis. And it works, and it addresses the needs of the patient. It addresses the needs of a health system. It addresses the needs of industry in doing this. And so it is probably the most, it is the standout theme or issue in terms of a game changer. The second game changer is clinical data. There's a need for clinical data so that we can actually, it relates to and is related to what we're talking about for a diagnosis, but it's also needed, what we need in order to be able to access this data and to be able to share this data is we need a policy framework. We need policy frameworks that will enable us to be able to safely and engage with sharing data that is critical for patients around the world, particularly when we're dealing with small numbers of dispersed population. So those patients around the world achieving that diagnosis. One of the other things it does, which is really critical in this space, is that it provides certainty and safety for doctors to practice in a way that is going to be aligned with the patient needs. And that's what I'm talking about in terms of the dispersed nature. There may be only one patient in a community or one patient in a country. And in order to achieve the best practice guidelines, in order to get a diagnosis for that patient, in order for the doctor to help to understand what that patient's journey might be like, we're needing to be able to share data. And so we need to de-risk it for the medical community, and we need to de-risk it for government. And to do that, that's a policy decision. And so now, as rare diseases begins to mature, we need to start thinking about the policy implications and building the policy frameworks in which all this technology and knowledge can live. And part of that as well is sharing evidence on health technology assessment. Everybody is doing a health technology assessment on the same issues, on health, the health economic data, and on health system impact of rare diseases, and on the family impact, the social impact of rare diseases. We need to start to share this data more and more. And then the third one is that we got from the theme 1 and from across the sessions was, and this is drawing on that, is the need for precision public health policy. And what I'm talking about for precision public health is to be able to use the new lens that we have from the knowledge that's being developed to be able to make the policy decisions and to develop policy frameworks that are going to allow us to put these practices and these new practices into action in our, across our health system, across our patient support system, across our social support and our workforce, because rare diseases and the work that's coming out of rare diseases isn't just changing the lives of the patients, of people living with rare disease, it's changing the lives of the clinicians. I don't think that you yet understand, and we yet understand, the transformative and the massive changes that's going to be in the workforce, and of the transformative change that can come about through rare disease research. And so it's by developing precision public health policy that we're going to start to see it. I'll give you one quick example and then I'll hand over. But, you know, the European reference networks, which is a European Commission decision, is linking up with the rare disease clinical research networks in the US. What a massive undertaking that's going to be, and how important and how powerful that's going to be. Underpinning all of that, though, is going to be human phenotype ontologies, which is a system that's been written by a clinician in Europe, in Germany, and it underpins just about all of the developments that we're going to need for precision public health policy, because it defines a language by which to talk about the disease conditions. And yet it's sitting there, and it's going to need to be supported, because it's one of the pillars by which we're going to be able to develop these policies and be able to make these changes and be able to enable that ERN, the European Reference Network, and the rare disease clinical reference research networks across these in that transatlantic space to be able to talk to each other, because it's developing the common. It contains the common language, yep. And it's And it is that language that's going to be facilitating timely ascertainment and standardisation of objective phenotyping. It's going to be a natural language for phenotyping. Underpinning that, and next to that, is something that is a world standard that for Europeans who have grown up with OrphanNet and ORPHA codes and that portal, you don't recognise how critical and important it is worldwide. And here is a structure as well that is going to be part of that language that's going to enable the European networks to talk to other disease entities around the world and help us to achieve the ERDIC aim of classifying and being able to diagnose most rare diseases by 2020. So the three things: achieving an accurate diagnosis, clinical. I'll have to learn to count, won't I? Achieving an accurate diagnosis, I'll start again with the fingers. Clinical data and precision public health, about policy that's going to be sustaining, and that is and policy is the transformative nature, because it brings it into health systems, it brings it into government, and it makes it sustainable. So they're the things that we throw before the research community to help them align their work. So thank you for that.
Thank you. There's a lot, I think, of food for thought there. And it's interesting how, I'm sure as we go through the groups, there'll be so much cross-cutting across all of the different themes, which is important. But we're coming to theme 3, drug development and access and authorization, which is quite a large theme. And we have 3 people to talk to us about this theme. So I'll introduce you all initially, and then maybe you can talk to your own take-home messages. First, we have Bruno Cepidos, yep, correct? Right. PhD, and he's a professor of pharmacology and pharmacotherapy at the Faculty of Pharmacy of the University of Lisbon. Bruno is also the chair of the Committee of Orphan Medicinal Products at the COMP, and he's also a member of the Committee of Human Medicinal Products, the CHMP, at the European Medicines Agency in London, extending his membership also to the Committee of Advanced Therapies, the CAT, the CAT. We also have Anna Palma, a pharmaceutical doctor and a global HTA and country patient access lead for the Benelux countries for SOBI in Belgium. And then we also have Dr. Ree de Rieder, who is an MD and Chief Operating Officer of the Healthcare Insurance Department of the National Institute for Health and Disability Insurance, which is the national social and security-based health insurance regulator responsible for the Belgian universal and compulsory health insurance. So we've got a nice mix here of opinion from this particular thematic group. So what were your game changers? What did you take?
You start, Bruno?
I can start. Thank you very much, and thank you for the kind introduction. Basically, I will start because our session, our team in the end, was a group of sessions that led every participant through a path, through a walk, and the walk started precisely with the regulatory part. And I think the game changer for us is actually the change and the regulatory change now in drug development. We were used to see drug development as something very well defined in textbooks, and we now have a completely different paradigm to work with. So in terms of life cycle, the approach has to change. We have to rely in new ways of generating data and to use them to use this data early. So we need to adapt the knowledge that we have, and that's what regulation is doing so far, and that's what we've learned from the first session, and integrating this new knowledge into our decisions. These decisions, especially in rare disease, and that's a word we don't use often for other conditions, but they need to be flexible. We need regulatory flexibility for rare diseases, and this should be maintained. It has been so far like this, it shouldn't be changed. Nevertheless, these new approaches will require a high level of standards. These high standards should remain high as they are now, but for that we need multi-stakeholders collaboration. So involving patients at every step, the company in the industry, of course, they're involved, they're bringing the product to us, but also, as you will see, HTAs and payers and other interested parties. Last but not least, I think that it's very clear from all the initiatives from regulators' side in the last years that the benefit for the patient is the main driver and should always be the main driver. This was the spirit of the regulation, and we always mention the spirit of the regulation, so something like that, it's very far away, but it's not, it's close to our hearts, and this is actually something we should not forget. The benefit for the patient should be the first objective of all our adaptation to change and improvement.
Thank you. Anna, I think you would come next.
Thanks, Avril. Indeed, also something that became very apparent in theme 3 was that we do live indeed in times of very intense, but still somewhat complex, not to say chaotic, way of approaching access, and particularly early access. There are indeed a large amount of initiatives by and around the EMA, but also with various HTA agencies. And while this has been and continues to be a great pool of innovative concepts and pioneering collaborations with various forms of engagement, we felt in the discussion that it's still incomplete. And it is incomplete because while indeed regulatory and HTAs get more and more involved, these are not being encompassed by payers. And in parallel to that, the field itself is actually rapidly moving ahead of the game with new challenges, new scientific challenges like ATMPs, personalized medicine, and so on.
But at the same time, if we look at the payer side, in parallel to these developments, payers are getting more and more aware, payers singing all the time that same theme, that mantra saying pricing and reimbursement, it's our competence. Still now they are starting to discover that the challenges of access and sustainability, we won't arrive there if we don't start, and we are starting that, and experience and explore the added value of collaboration. Collaboration in different fields like horizon scanning, use of joint HTA reports, information sharing, and yes, even starting to jointly negotiate.
So indeed, clearly and you know, all in all, it has been acknowledged in our theme that there has been to date a very significant level of interface between the three main moments of the path that we have discussed at large, being the regulators, the HTAs, and the payers. However, we also felt that further integration and collaboration is still required if we are indeed to deliver on the patient's asks to accelerate reimbursed access to rare disease treatments for rare disease patients.
So, and that's becoming the new game, a new game with the players in the field that are the companies, the payers, and the patients. It's a field still burdened by mistrust, uncertainty, conflicting interests, and maybe a very important game changer that is lying ahead of us, that we payers across Europe get further organized and that we become able to present ourselves as a more tangible, a more coherent, a more trustable partner to make affordable and sustainable access to all valuable medicines a reality for all patients in Europe. These are our take-home messages.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And just to say, we will have some opportunity for questions from the audience as we finish our panel input. Now we move to theme 4, which is care provision. And mine and Matt's favourite subject, I think, at the moment, it's something that we're talking a lot about, the ERN process. So first, we have 2 speakers to give their views on their experience through this particular event. So firstly, Tim Voigtlander, yes, and who is co-chair of the Board of Member States and Clinical Institute of Neurology and Medical University in Vienna, and Associate Professor of Neurobiology and University Lecturer of Neurosciences at the same clinic. And also we have Matt Johnson, who many of you will be familiar with, who worked as the National Commissioner for Highly Specialised Healthcare, supporting the developed national clinical networks, and is currently Healthcare and Research Director at ECRD, working on the Joint Action for Rare Diseases and leads the European Reference Network. So I think we start with you, Matt.
So I think we've waited about 10 years for the game changer in healthcare to germinate from the seed which was planted in the Cross-Border Healthcare Directive. So we're at a point now where that seed is germinating with applications being developed as we speak, and in 3 weeks' time they'll be submitted for assessment. So the game changer in healthcare undoubtedly from our session has been that ERNs will move forward healthcare significantly, will change the landscape. They're already starting to change the rules of how healthcare is organised. We're seeing where before we had clinical competition rife, we're now seeing collaboration and cooperation between clinicians in a competitive assessment process. Clinicians are working together to align strategically the content of the applications so that the content, the scope of the rare diseases in there complement each other so no rare disease is left out. That the multi-system needs of rare diseases are all met and that there isn't part of this framework not established. We're seeing collaboration and cooperation at member state level. I think this is a huge step forward, and we should start to see the developments of regional connections as well as European connections. So that is happening now. Those changes are already being made, and it is very exciting. Going forward, the networks will need to be established and developed, and what will really transform healthcare in Europe is transparency. Transparency of outcomes for patients. Transparency to know where the expertise is. So the delay in getting a diagnosis, in searching for the expert, is reduced, and that these centres in these networks become magnets for patients to access expertise and diagnosis. And that transparency will also, hopefully, develop an environment of trust. Trust from the patient perspective that they know the competency levels of the centres and the experts they're going to, and trust between clinicians as well, and between member states and these networks. And in that trust, we should establish a culture of learning. We should avoid to capture a fever of standardisation for the sake of it. but celebrate the variation in practice that we have across Europe in clinical practice. Only standardise where there's a clear evidence that there's going to be an improvement. By getting transparency and identifying where the experts are, we will be breaking the isolation of care because we've connected up the experts. So when the applications are being assessed, that where the healthcare providers are, those experts for a huge amount of disease, not all 8,000 initially, will be visible on the Commission website. And there'll be websites where patients will be able to go on and find where they need to go. So networks are just connections of people, and therefore it's about relationships. I think we need to put value in those relationships, and that value in relationships will equate to quality of care. But I think we need to not get lost in the administration and organisation, but focus on the establishment of these networks and keep things simple.
Thank you, Matt. Till?
Yeah, if I step in, as we heard from Matt, the ERN, the creation of the ERN is the key game changer in healthcare provision. That's our belief, really. So what I would like to offer to you as 3 key aspects or elements. So it's in a way 3 A's. And my first A is accessibility. That is one of the key elements we see for this concept, and accessibility has different aspects. I mean, it's on the one hand, if you come from the research perspective, a bit more accessibility to data, accessibility to samples, accessibility to further information, to then extract information and extract your further research work, to drive research, to drive innovation. But accessibility is also what is the case or the important point for patients. If they have to be able to access this concept, this system. And that links back to the fact that the background nodes of these ERNs are the healthcare providers on the national level. And it is a very, very important aspect that these national healthcare providers are linked to their national aspect, respecting all the differences and respecting the peculiarities of each national healthcare provision system. If this fails, the whole concept will fail. We have, in a way, ERNs are a mixture of a bottom-up application process, a bit of a top-down decision process, but finally it's really, again, bottom-up on a national level, how to access these centers and how to get the expertise, and if there is a need, how to achieve it that patients really can travel and can retrieve health care abroad. That would be my first A. The second A is assurance, and Matt has already told about trust, and I think a very important point in this ERN concept is the creation of trust into this concept. And trust is, of course, again, different levels. So trust between the experts that are connected in the network, and now we are forming networks which are bigger than the previous bottom-up driven networks, so they include more and more experts. They still do not know each other, so they have to really build up an atmosphere of trust that they really collaborate on a very, very intimate level, if I can say so. Trust by patients, that they really see these are now the healthcare providers that offer the best care possible in Europe. But also, and that's the point I come to the payer side, trust in the system that where the patient goes and where it gets its expertise or where it gets a diagnosis also, they can really trust in. And that might be then a game changer for what we see. Currently we have some difficulties with cross-border healthcare really to, that patients can get their care also in a different country. And I think ERNs here are really a very, very important stone, a milestone to give this trust to payers that they are ready to say, yes, we believe on that, we know everything has been clarified now, and now we really give our pre-authorization. And the third A is a bit word of caution. And I have been listening to all the talks in the past 1.5 days. I heard a lot of aspiration and a lot of expectations that ERNs more or less are a wonder weapon that solves now every problem related to rare diseases. And that is very dangerous. We have to keep in mind that this concept of ERNs as being connecting healthcare providers. So ERNs, of course, are a means of retrieving specialist advice. It's in part also to be able to send patients abroad, but mainly it's the expertise that has to travel. It's not to solve certain particular problems on the national level. So we have been talking about the problem, for instance, of transition from the childhood over adolescence to adulthood. That is not a task of the ERN. It's a task in the member states that the healthcare is organized in a way and that the nodes within the ERN are connected in each country from pediatrician departments to adulthood departments, and that this transition period, for instance, is organized perfectly. And so my plea is really look what is the capability of an ERN, what should an ERN deliver, and what is the responsibility of the healthcare provider, and in that way the national system, and don't mix that up, because if you raise false expectations, I can tell you that will fail, and then you will be very disappointed about a concept that is really the game changer in healthcare. Thank you. Thank
you very much for that intervention. And now we move on to social care. So Dorica is going to take us through theme 5. Dorica is a mother of Oana, who is 31 years old and who lives with Prader-Willi syndrome. She is the Awardis board member and chair of the Romanian Prader-Willi organization in Romania, and she's president of the Romanian National Alliance for Rare Diseases. She's also president of the Romanian Association for Rare Cancers and the coordinator of the Centre for Information about Rare Genetic Disease and Neuro Centre, and she is a member of the CGRD. So she's a very busy lady. So what are your take-home messages?
So the main message from our session was, our theme was, of course, that the main game changer in the social field will be the recommendation that was recently adopted on social policy, because this recommendation is coming at the same time with the organization of European reference networks, and that is very important, and at national level of revisit of the centers of expertise or reaccreditation or accreditation for the first time of the centers of expertise in order to participate in European reference networks. And this is very important because patients patients with rare disease become this way again people with rare diseases. And it was mentioned yesterday from the patients was mentioning this. And when we come to the people, to the real life, everyday life, we have to rethink about access to buildings, for instance, to simple things like life, the real life. We have to think about education, about how to educate people with rare diseases, and we need more innovation in social services, because we need innovation, for instance, for a child with EB that needs to eat. We need a tool to eat. We need more innovation in communication. We need more collaboration among healthcare providers or among patients. And we need tools for communication or a platform for communication and exchange of information and guidelines. So we need more innovation in our services. And also, coming back to the patient life, for instance, for children, we need tools for rehabilitation that let them play and not believe that they are always under treatment. Thinking about the story of a Syrian patient, how his life was in hospital, we need more type of activities for children to make them believe they are playing. For instance, we are implementing something called MIRA. It's for children, and we use it in kinetotherapy. And this makes children in our center believe that they are playing videos and not doing gymnastics. So that is very important for everyday life. This is about in social services. Also, we need more case managers in our services. Case manager was one of the topic in our sessions, and I would like to recall what Lena said yesterday. We need a revolution in social services. We need more innovation, and we need the implementation of social policy into healthcare systems in the member states. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dorica. That's great. Thank you. Because it's the fundamental, it's as we call it, it's back at the ranch, you know, day to day. And that's why it's so important. And it's a great credit to Dorica for the development this year in social care policy. It really is groundbreaking. And we move on, last but not least at all, to Duran Wong Rieger. Duran has been running around like a headless chicken, I think, for the past 3 days. I think she's been in every session, so many of you will have met her. But just those of you who may not know, she is President and CEO of the Canadian Organisation for Rare Disorders, and she's the chair of the Consumer Advocare Network. She was a professor of psychology for 30 years, and currently she is a member of the Governing Council of Rare Disease International and a past president of the Board of Directors and International Alliance of Patients Organisations. So, Theme 6, Global Society, your take-home messages.
First of all, thank you very, very much for the opportunity, and I guess being from Canada is a very good opportunity with you to talk about the fact that Eurorders is very global. So I think that's a huge credit to Eurorders for having actually, from the very beginning, I think really had a global outlook. So lots of things came up in these sessions, and it's so hard to pin them down to 3. One of the things I think was really fitting in that whole notion of game changers is international alliances. Both international alliances as now being a game changer in terms of how they operate, but also the very fact that so much is being done international alliance to international alliance, which came out. But I think what we also recognize is that there may be alliances that are working better in some areas, like in research. So we've got gene discovery, or we've got sequencing, and we've got certainly working, I would say, exceedingly well at the patient group level. So RDI, Rare Disease International, is a huge credit to that. Virtual communities like Rare Connect. But in other areas, like health policies, like health services, like access, probably not as much international alliances being active in terms of changing the game for rare diseases as sounds like it will be. Second key theme, I think, is global awareness. And I think we had a great session on social media, but beyond that, I think what is exciting is rare disease is part of the global lexicon. And it's part of ordinary discourse, that common people will talk about rare diseases. I think years ago, people would not even understand what you're talking about when you said a rare disease. And I think now, even though, we may not have a common definition of what a rare disease is, there is recognition that we're talking about diseases that affect a small number of people, usually severe, usually progressive, usually requiring some special emphasis in terms of research or other kinds of initiatives in order to provide that same kind of a development. So I think global awareness in so many respects and fueled by so many of the innovative techniques that we've got. I think the third thing that came up, and it was discussed a good deal, is that I would call it a global gap. And that is we have still, and some fear that we may actually have an increasing gap between developed, low and middle income, developing countries in terms of rare diseases, where we've got developing countries increasingly driven by high tech, by biotechnology, increasingly sort of policies that actually support it, specialized cares, therapies. I think huge innovations in what Dorica's talking about in terms of using the social care. And yet we still have in low middle income countries where there's a basic struggle. And I think as we talked about in terms of public health policy, insurance, that rare diseases are part and parcel of that whole development area. There's even huge disparities still in terms of research and research investment, where again, we're still not seeing the research investment in terms of low and middle income countries, and certainly the conditions in terms of these countries. So I think as we're moving forward globally in rare diseases, I think it behooves us all not to forget that not everybody's moving at that same pace, and unless we do something very deliberately as a global community, we're going to exacerbate that as opposed to it's going to be naturally taking care of itself. So those are my takeaways there.
Thanks, Duran. So we have heard from our panel, who have been very much involved in developing the content for the various themes. And now maybe we have some time for maybe 2 or 3 questions from the audience. So I will have to rely on somebody to tell me if there's somebody with their hands up, or is there anybody with a question? No, is everybody just absolutely exhausted at this point? No, I just have just one question. You know, I think it's extremely interesting, and for me personally, trying to get to all of the themes and all of the different workshops to get a snapshot of what has been discussed, there seems to be a lot of progress. You know, there are mechanisms that are being developed that will lead to, if they are implemented correctly, that will certainly lead to progress and better standards of care, certainly. We've heard a lot about diagnostics, applying the knowledge that we have discovered in diagnostics to the clinic, which is incredibly important. The relationship that has with research, the relationship that has with the development of therapies, the relationship that then has with issues concerning access because of data collection. We also have heard a lot about, you know, what's happening day to day for patients, the issue of how do we care for people with rare diseases, and everything is in a circle. It comes around, you know, in a circle. What is really interesting, though, is a theme that has come up not only in our General Assembly and in our Council of National Alliances, which many of you will have been at during the week, is the issue of ERNs and the great hope that there is that a structure like this will go a long way towards bringing these issues together under one roof, allowing the disease-specific areas to work together for better standards of care. Again, for us as patients, it's all about care. It's all about diagnostics. It's all about care. It's all about access. But also to have the individual groups have an opportunity to work together across the thematic areas, which I think is quite unique. And so, speaking from a patient perspective, that for me has come out as a real game changer. Yes, we know, as Till said, it's not going to sort everything out, but the reality is it's going to go some ways. And to Hugh's point as well earlier, the development of these ERNs will allow us to potentially reach out beyond our European borders and include other regions, because one of the other themes from this particular event has been the need to work internationally. The whole drive towards rare disease international is incredibly important. So I don't know if anyone has any final brief comments that they'd like to make. Duran here?
Just an anecdote, which was kind of interesting. So somebody came up to me at this conference, somebody I know well, who's never come to a Eurordis meeting before. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I would have said a global, you know, a game changer would have been patient-centeredness. But of course, we know patients are so integral to rare diseases in every single part, fueled by at every single level. And so we accept it. And she came up to me and she says, do you know there are some sessions that are not being run by patients?
Exactly, and I think that might be a nice place to leave it today, because I'm very conscious that we've had a long couple of days here. Some of us have been here for 4 days, and we've discussed a lot of issues. And what Duran has said, I think, really is an exemplar of what Eurordis is all about, which is bringing our stakeholders together for a common purpose. We all sit here today representing different groups, but we all want the same outcome. And I think that's unique, but it needs to be not unique. We need to bring this out into our communities, our disease-specific communities, and our national alliances and beyond, because working together is what's going to get us where we need to go. We heard yesterday from the European Commission that we're on slightly shaky ground in Europe. It's a new era. We have concerns, but we as patients will always work together because we understand the benefits of working together regardless of what's going on outside. We must maintain that. That's incredibly important. And this particular ECRD I found very interesting because we had so many new people attending, new organizations, young people, older people, and everything in the middle. And that's really what it's all about, because rare diseases affect everybody at every stage of their lives in every country. And to have so much representation here has been really, really wonderful. I would be remiss if I didn't thank ECRD for their exemplary work, which they always pull it out of the bag. They always put on a great show for all of us and make it so easy for those of us who've been involved in all the various groups to be able to participate. They do so much work. And I'd like the staff of ECRD to maybe stand up. That includes you, Matt. And I think we should give them all a round of applause for their commitment and their dedication. Because without them, we wouldn't be here. We absolutely wouldn't be here. And they work in their offices around Europe and they don't see the impact of their work day to day. And I can tell you, there is huge impact. So keep fighting the fight for us. We really appreciate your work. And we'd really like to thank the DIA also for being our partners in this conference, and all of our supporters and all of our friends who have gotten us to this point. Now, my Irish colleagues have asked me if I could be very brief, which is a very difficult thing to do, because 2 Irish teams are playing rugby here for a European Cup final in Edinburgh. Can you, like, the reason for that I'm not going to explain to you, but anyway, they're like, could you wrap it up? So my team isn't playing, so I'm sorry. I'm going to continue for a little while. No, honestly. No, our next ECRD will be in Vienna in 2 years' time. And I was speaking to a colleague from Vienna this morning. We were saying, what are we going to be discussing? What will we see? What developments will there be? We'll have ERNs. We'll see how the social policy development will have been enacted. National plans, in many cases, will be on their second stage. So, you know, there's a lot to be hopeful for. There really, really is. But we have so much work to do. It does seem that one of the real sticking points of this particular event has been the issue of access. Access to therapies, the authorization mechanisms, and the access. It just is coming up all of the time. You know, as patients, we no longer want to be in the middle between industry and the payers. We want to work together. We have worked together. The policies are there. They need to be enacted. And we, as a movement, are not going to stop. We are not going to be quiet on this, because every second counts when you have a rare disease, every second. So we will work together, and I think this will be a priority for our organisation into the future. And we do hope that the structures that we have discussed will help us to get where we need to go. So it's a really lovely, sunny evening in Edinburgh. The sun came out for our final day, came out for our final evening. So I hope that those of you who are staying will have a fantastic weekend here in this very beautiful city. And the rest of you will catch your planes on time, even if you have to stop and watch a match on the way or whatever. But no, honestly, just thank you all so much for taking the time, the effort, which is a lot of effort for people who have rare diseases and who are caring for people with rare diseases, to take this journey. It involves a lot of sacrifice and military precision to be here. We really appreciate that, and we look forward to seeing you in Vienna in 2018. Thank you very much, and thank you to our panel.